Tonight, Tasmanians vote in an historic upper house poll. Bosnia on the brink, UN peacekeepers held as a human shield, and Australia's spy work likely to be open to more public scrutiny. Good evening, Alison Smith with ABC News. 86,000 Tasmanians were sent to the polls today to choose 5 legislative councillors. Candidates in the historic poll are now waiting nervously as electoral officers count the votes.
The campaign over, this was the day of reckoning for 25 aspiring legislative councillors.
Michael Aird, AIRD.
The race for the seats of Derwent, Queenborough, West Devon, Tamar and Pembroke was gruelling. For former Labor MHA Michael Aird, polling day brought nervous relief.
This has been the hardest campaign I've ever fought. The fact that ever since I got endorsed in March, I've only had 2 days away from door knocking. That was Good Friday and Easter Sunday, and I've called at about 6,000 houses.
The election will see 3 fresh faces after the retirement of sitting members in Derwent, Queenborough and West Devon. Queenborough was the most hotly contested, with 9 candidates. There was no doubt how lawyer Jim Wilkinson cast his vote.
Yeah, you're always a bit nervous, but you can't do anything about it now, just have to wait and see.
This was the first time 5 legislative council seats have been up for election on one day, with more than a quarter of Tasmanian voters sent to the polls. A strong turnout was expected, the number of pre-poll votes up 33%. Postal vote applications had tripled. Pembroke's Peter McKay made sure some of his voters went to the poll, offering a free taxi service. He's held the seat for 19 years. This, his 5th election.
It's been a pretty rugged campaign. We've had some interesting to and fro's with signs.
Polling booths closed just over an hour ago. Results of first preference votes for the 5 seats should be known by 10 o'clock tonight, but it may be 24 hours before the winners can celebrate.
ABC News will have the latest results from the tally room in a special bulletin at 9:20 tonight. The UN faces an awful choice in Bosnia tonight: to call off the NATO bombing raids, virtually abandoning civilians in the safe havens to the Serb guns, or to send in the planes, knowing UN peacekeepers may be among the first to die. The Serbs have seized at least 8 UN soldiers, chaining them to potential military targets as human shields against further NATO airstrikes. Another 200 peacekeepers are surrounded as possible hostages. The confrontation follows a second wave of NATO airstrikes on an ammunition dump near the Bosnian Serb capital of Pale, retaliation for Serb shelling of Tuzla that killed more than 70 civilians.
It was as effective as holding a knife to the throat of the Allies. Unarmed UN peacekeepers chained like animals to Serb military sites. Their Serb captors warning that their lives would be forfeit unless NATO called off airstrikes. It was a message spelt out chillingly by the hostages themselves.
If the bombing stops, we'll be set free, otherwise we will be killed, over. If the bombing starts again, I've been instructed to tell you that we will die for the sake of NATO, over.
The West seemed at a loss how to respond.
Right now, there's a lot of discussion between ourselves, our leadership in Zagreb, and one hopes with the international community, those that underwrite our operations here in the former Yugoslavia.
British Prime Minister John Major and German leader Helmut Kohl, meeting in Bonn, said they'd asked Boris Yeltsin to lean on the Serbs. Yeltsin said he'd only do it if there were no more airstrikes. Only a few hours before, NATO had launched its second raid within 24 hours against Serb positions. Its target, again, an ammunition dump outside the rebel Serb headquarters at Pale. But despite the mission's technical success, it brought little comfort to the Bosnian side. They were mourning the more than 69 civilians killed during Serb shelling of the Bosnian town of Tuzla on Thursday night. All victims were under the age of 30, an act of carnage which prompted Bosnian leaders again to plead for the lifting of the arms embargo and for NATO not to lose its resolve.
We, the Bosnians, have now once again paid a very heavy price. do not make us pay an even heavier price by losing resolve and succumbing to terrorism.
The West is now frantically weighing its options, with Britain and France hinting that they might opt to withdraw their contingents from Bosnia. But whatever strategy the Allies arrive at, it'll be doomed without unity and the political will to maintain it. For now, the Serbs have the upper hand, with dozens of UN peacekeepers in their custody.
The UN is reported to be in disarray over what to do next. Secretary-General Boutros Ghali has asked the Security Council to decide whether to order further airstrikes. But there are reports that all Council members, including the US, France and Russia, have handed the problem back to Dr. Boutros Ghali, saying it's his decision. Whatever the immediate outcome, a major change in the UN operation in Bosnia seems certain. New French President Jacques Chirac is threatening to withdraw French troops unless greater emphasis is placed on their protection. The Security Council meets again tonight for a fresh briefing on the crisis.
NATO has released cockpit videos of the first airstrike against the ammunition depot. It shows spectacular explosions as 2 of the bunkers were destroyed. Another 4 were reported to have been blown up in the second raid this morning. But for all its technical success, the air operation has been brought up short by the Bosnian Serb response. The NATO commander appeared to describe the raids just as news of the hostages was coming through.
Well, it puts both the UNPRO 4 and United Nations Peace Force and NATO in a very difficult position, not to mention the 4 UNMOs that happen to be out there. Obviously, we are concerned with their welfare.
Everyone needed time to think, but the United States, which has been pressing for tougher action, was offering no apologies.
The action we took was appropriate. It was in response to the request from the UN, and it certainly was provoked by the inappropriate shelling of civilians by the Bosnian Serbs.
The Bosnian Serbs continue to be provocative. They broke into a UN weapons store this afternoon and removed more heavy weapons. Their spokesmen defend their responses.
I think if the point is made that there are consequences for NATO air action against the Serb side and the Serb side alone, it will contribute to the calming of the waters. If you think that the Serbs will continue turning the other cheek and letting the, NATO getting away with this sort of thing with impunity, I think you're very naive.
The UN has chosen to raise the stakes on the grounds that its troops could no longer stand by in humiliating impotence. But the Bosnian Serbs have redoubled the bet and offered the UN a stark choice: pull out or push on and accept the risks.
Foreign Affairs Minister Gareth Evans says he's satisfied Australia's ACES spy agency is doing its job properly, but the minister says it could be open to more public scrutiny. His comments follow claims by the ABC yesterday that Australian intelligence agencies were involved with the Americans in a bugging operation against China.
If governments and their intelligence agencies were concerned about yesterday's revelations, they weren't about to show it. It's a convention throughout the world for countries not to comment on intelligence matters. That protocol was followed today. The Americans are accused of spying on China using the Chinese embassy in Canberra. It's claimed they supplied bugging equipment that was built into the embassy in 1989. The Americans controlled the surveillance operation, deciding what information was passed on to Australia. In Washington, the State Department was saying little.
Well, the report that I saw, the news report that I saw, had the word intelligence in it. And since it did, it gave me license to say that I can't comment on intelligence information in any way. Just can't do it.
There are concerns in the Australian intelligence community that the Americans may have benefited from valuable trade information about China at the expense of Australia.
And indeed that there is maybe a conflict of interest there with the Americans when they're competing with the US on trade deals with China. I mean, getting the inside edge on wheat prices or coal or whatever is obviously a critical part of negotiations.
Foreign Affairs Minister Gareth Evans has declined to comment on the spy claims. Speaking from South Africa, he says he has no reason to believe Australian intelligence agencies have done anything wrong.
I'm only responsible for one of them, that's ASIS, and yes, I am confident that they are behaving themselves within the terms of their charter, and so much was concluded, in fact, by the Samuels Royal Commission.
But Senator Evans concedes ASIS could be open to more scrutiny.
Yes, I think more can be made public and put on the record, and just how much more will be a matter for my statement in Parliament in a few days' time.
In Tokyo, Prime Minister Keating again refused to be drawn.
You know that I'll adopt the view that every predecessor of mine's ever adopted and say that that I won't be commenting on intelligence and security matters.
The ABC is facing restrictions on what it says about the claims in future. Because of a Supreme Court injunction, ABC TV can't identify anyone allegedly involved in the spy operation.
Prime Minister Keating is preparing to leave Japan tomorrow with what he believes is a trade breakthrough for Australia. Tokyo has thrown its weight behind APEC as the region's main cooperative body, above other groups that would exclude Australia. Today, on a visit to a war cemetery, Mr Keating recalled Japan's World War II atrocities and the cruelties suffered by Australian troops. Political editor Russell Barton is travelling with the Prime Minister.
The Hodogaya War Cemetery near Yokohama is the resting place of 280 Australians, all prisoners of war who were captured in Southeast Asia early in the Pacific conflict, transported to Japan to work as forced labourers in appalling, brutal conditions. They never left. Paul Keating came here today to honour these men.
We mourn because they were Australians like ourselves and they suffered cruelly.
But nowhere at Hodogaya is it explained how and why these Australians lie here. That's something the Prime Minister has been trying to rectify in his urgings this week for the Japanese to officially acknowledge their aggressive role in the war.
We believe it is important that Japan should not allow these events to be forgotten. We believe that our friendship will be stronger if the truth about these events is known to the Japanese people, and we're pleased that the Japanese government has taken steps to make it known.
But those steps are still in troubled infancy. The Japanese Parliament, the Diet, deeply split over a resolution apologising for the war. But Paul Keating's determined to keep up the pressure, to help deepen the relationship, which he believes has been significantly enhanced by this visit. Australian officials believe this document marks the advance, a joint declaration on the Australia-Japan partnership. The breakthrough, they say, is this sentence: the two governments pledge their commitment to APEC as the primary vehicle of regional economic cooperation.
Well, I mean, I thought that the declaration was fairly self-evident. I mean, not too many of you will see another one of these, no matter how long you're in the game.
Again discussed at lunch with Foreign Minister Yohei Kono today, the APEC Free Trade Group is now seen by our officials as having an assured future, with Japan preferring this group to the East Asia Economic Caucus, promoted by Malaysia's Dr Mahathir, a group which he says should not include Australia. Mr Keating finishes his official engagements tonight, flying home tomorrow for this week's resumption of Parliament.
New South Wales detectives investigating the theft of $5 million worth of gold from Kerry Packer have charged a Victorian man. He was arrested in Melbourne overnight after allegedly demanding money, claiming to know where the gold was located.
Early this morning, Major Crime Squad detectives from New South Wales arrested a 54-year-old man from Coldstream, east of Melbourne. The detectives are investigating the theft of gold from media magnate Kerry Packer in Sydney earlier this month. The gold bullion, worth $5.3 million, was stolen from Mr Packer's office at the headquarters of Australian Consolidated Press. Melvin Lawrence Henderson appeared in an out-of-sessions court hearing this morning, charged with demanding money with menace. It's alleged he asked for money, claiming to know where the gold bars were located. However, he has not been charged in relation to the robbery itself. Mr Henderson was remanded in custody to appear in the Melbourne Magistrates Court on Monday, where Major Crime Squad detectives will apply for his extradition to New South Wales. Meanwhile, detectives are continuing their investigations into the theft.
The Australian Olympic Committee went into damage control today over $1 billion blowout in staging the year 2000 Games. Business will be targeted to help make up the shortfall. And in a turnaround, Olympic Organising Committee head Gary Pemberton says he doubts whether there'll be any damage to Sydney's overseas image in the long run.
Only days after the surprise announcement that the cost of the year 2000 Games was up by $1 billion, and money was sure to be an issue at the Australian Olympic Committee's annual general meeting. Organising Committee President Gary Pemberton had been worried about the implications for the Games TV rights. But when asked today if damage had occurred...
I don't believe so in the long run. I don't think there's ever been an Olympics that hasn't made some headlines on the way through. And I think the image of Sydney is still very strong.
But Australian Olympic Committee President John Coates has a less rosy view.
It certainly has created some uncertainty, but I think that any uncertainty that has been created has been addressed by the strong commitment at the federal government and the state level today.
Olympics Minister Michael Knight is looking to fix the financial problems quickly. Michael Knight is going to tackle the increased village cost estimate by going directly to private business. He's forming a forum of development companies, financial institutions and other interested parties to look at ways of minimising expense to the taxpayer. The other ongoing controversy was over Commonwealth Games official Arthur Tunstall. Clearly today, he knew his position was being closely watched.
All these people expecting me to resign today. That's what they're all here for. No.
There was no resignation today, but Sports Minister John Faulkner remains worried.
I have been concerned the impact that some of the comments and statements that Mr Tunstall has made.
He said he had been trying to contact Arthur Tunstall for a talk, but without luck.
Researchers into chronic fatigue syndrome are travelling Australia trying to convince doctors that the illness is real. Last year, university studies found evidence that chronic fatigue syndrome is not psychological, but researchers say their message is not getting through.
Researchers into chronic fatigue syndrome say often people like these are being made to suffer twice. Apart from feeling flu-like symptoms such as tiredness and dizziness, they also have to convince doctors that their symptoms are legitimate.
They're called hypochondriacs and malingerers. All of our blood tests usually come back normal, so therefore the doctors don't believe we have any illness at all.
Last year, researchers at Newcastle University discovered differences in the urine samples of those who have the symptoms. They're now touring the nation, speaking to doctors and sufferers to get more attention and funding for further research.
We're trying to, first of all, get the message out that the disease does exist and that it is a metabolic phenomenon and not something that is in the mind.
It's estimated that up to 3% of the population experiences chronic fatigue syndrome at some stage of their lives. Researchers say their next goal is to make tests available to the public, with further studies to focus on finding a cause and a cure.
The future of an exotic, seldom seen land crayfish is in doubt. Field naturalists say the species is threatened by land clearing in northern Tasmania and by the increasing introduction of an interstate species of yabbies to farm dams.
You wouldn't find one of the crayfish in question unless you went looking for one, or more appropriately, digging for one, near streams and in wet spots.
Okay, let's give him a wash and see what he really looks like here. He looks like he's going to be quite a flashy little guy. Geez, a bright orange one. It's beautiful.
The crayfish is Engaeus auramacana, found only around Lilydale in northeast Tasmania.
They're built a little bit like bulldozers. As you can notice, they have huge claws and a very vaulted carapace.
But Jim Nelson says land clearing and the increasing and illegal introduction of the mainland yabby to stock farm dams threatens the little crayfish. The yabby, Carax destructor, lives up to its reputation.
Carax destructor isn't named destructor for its nice manners. It actually can destroy dams.
And there's the risk of introducing disease to a fragile native crayfish population.
This is something that's happened in Europe where the crayfish fauna has virtually been wiped out by introductions of crayfish from America.
The Lilydale crayfish has recently been placed on the Tasmanian endangered species list. But Jim Nelson and his field naturalist colleagues fear this alone will not be sufficient to protect the little creature.
All the news in sport now with Rob Waters.
Thanks very much, Alison. Good evening, everyone. In the AFL, Carlton has fallen for the second week in a row, this time to bottom of the ladder, St Kilda. Stuart Lowe kicked goals at one end of the ground, while the young Saints kept the Blues goalless for almost 3 quarters.
A poor crowd and grey skies welcomed Justin Madden onto Waverley in his 250th senior appearance for the Blues. But the Saints were out to ruin Harry's party as Keogh clashed heavily with Hannah in the opening minute. He was forced off the ground but returned soon after, Keogh now after Whitehead. there was no doubting St Kilda's superior skills, the pace of Austin Jones setting up Winmar, and the Saints led by 4 goals at quarter time.
Sensational stuff.
David Parkin tried his best to ignite the Blues, but their lack of concentration once again proved costly, as Lowe continued to create problems up forward. The Saints' young brigade were magnificent, with Jones and Brown running under pressure, Lowe adding the finishing touches.
Lowe gets his foot to it and kicks a goal.
And there was no reprieve in the second half as Burke stretched the lead to 46 points. Finally, midway through the third term, Carlton kicked its first goal of the day. Stan Alves urged his players to go on with it, and they responded as planned. The Blues ended with their second lowest score against the Saints, and captain Danny Frawley gave credit to a loyal band of supporters. The celebrations continued in the rooms, their 5th win against Carlton since 1978, something to savour.
In other matches, Essendon took out the Whitten Cup, honouring football great Ted Whitten with victory over Footscray. The West Coast eased away from a determined Fitzroy in Canberra, and Geelong's great form continued last night with a big win over North Melbourne. North Launceston handed Glenorchy one of the most comprehensive thrashings in the club's proud history today, winning by 126 points. The drubbing was the Magpies' second in a row, while the Robins, unbeaten and on top, go from strength to strength. Jason Gibson has had a fortnight he won't forget. Last week he won a game with a goal on the siren, and today he set up the Robins with a brilliant 9-goal cameo as North jumped the Magpies.
Jason Gibson is on absolute fire.
And they've unearthed some new stars, particularly dashing wingman Sam Dunstan. The Magpies showed only flashes of what they're capable of.
Has a snapshot, and he's put it through.
With Rhys Jones impassable at half-back, the Robins were in complete control until a mini Magpie revival got them back to within 30 points at half-time.
Here's Stephen Cox with an important kick. Who knows, the Maggies could be back in business.
But the Robins completely exposed Glenorchy in the second half with 17 goals to 2. Gibson got better and better.
Jason Gibson for number 7.
And the Maggies were powerless to stop him. Everything the former William Leach medalist touched turned to goal. He found a willing partner in Cassidy, who chipped in with 6 of his own. The Robins by 126 points.
Make that 9.
Elsewhere, Clarence dished out similar treatment to Launceston. The Demons home in a thriller over Sandy Bay. New Norfolk just edged out Devonport, and South has finally won a game. The problems continue for Hobart. The Robins remain on top from the Eagles, with Clarence third. Glenorchy has dropped out of the 5. The unbeaten Eastern Rangers proved too strong for the Tassie Mariners in the VSFL Under-18 competition played in Devonport today. The Rangers kicked 7 goals in the first quarter to set up a 77-point win. Ben Beams kicked 5 goals for the Mariners. In basketball, the Tassie Devils will be hoping for an improved performance when they square up to the Newcastle Falcons in Newcastle tonight. The Devils went down to the Illawarra Hawks 109-75 in last night's NBL game in Wollongong. To racing, and the rivalry between Dane Wynn and Brave Warrior continued in Brisbane today with the running of the $300,000 Doomben Cup. And once again it was Dane Wynn who came home the winner, Shane Dye producing another master ride. The win provides a headache for Connections. They have to decide whether to go for the Queensland Derby or spell the horse with the Cox Plate and Japan Cup in mind.
Brisbane turned on perfect weather for the running of the Doomben Cup, and with it came all the glamour and glitz of this special occasion. Shane Dye on Damon was installed as the favourite, with the big threats expected from sentimental favourite Rough Habit and Brave Warrior.
Dane Wynn and Rough Habit come to the corner together. Brave Warrior 3 deep from Dana Singer. Arbor Reyes perch right on their heels as they turn the corner. Filet by a Presser and Tarradu and Ivory's Irish into the straight. Dane Wynn and Rough Habit led together. Brave Warrior on the outside and Arbor Reyes going to come and have the last rash at them. Dana Singer going for the run on the fence, then Ivory's Irish. Dane Wynn in front, 100 to go. He's a link. Dana Singer. Tarradu's getting out of the pack. Dane Wynn and Dana Singer from Tarradu. Dane Wynn's just in front. Dye's throwing everything at him. He's home in the cup. Dane Wynn.
He's probably the best horse we've seen in a long, long time, like going back to Bozan probably, because he's got no faults and it's a big advantage.
Australian coach Bob Dwyer has reacted to his team's loss in the World Cup opener by making sweeping changes to the Wallaby lineup for Wednesday's game against Canada. There are no less than 9 new names in the team. Meantime, Canada, France and Scotland have made a strong start to the competition.
In recent history, Gavin Hastings has battled behind a struggling Scottish outfit. Today he charged to the front and launched a point-scoring blitz. Hastings scored 44 points, a world record, Scotland trouncing Ivory Coast 89-0. At the South African capital, the French struggled to bury the Tongans. At half-time, the Europeans led 6-0. But in the final minutes, the French broke loose, the tricolours' backline sweeping wide for captain Philippe Saint-André to score. The French going on to win 38 points to 10. And at Port Elizabeth, the Canadians won their first match in Pool A, downing the Romanians 34 points to 3. The highlight, a slashing try down the right-hand touchline.
Good support, wonderful skills. Stewart back again. This is going to be a superb try.
The England cricket team has picked up where the world champion Australian 11 left off, beating the West Indies by a convincing margin in the second one-day international at the Oval. England won by 25 runs, the surprise victory levelling the series at 1-1.
Most of England's recent entries in the record books have been of the unspeakable variety, so today's effort should render their numerous critics nigh on speechless with astonishment. Not only did Atherton and Hicks set about the West Indies bowlers with unaccustomed relish during a 144-run stand of the highest calibre, but when both departed in quick succession after lunch, the rest defied recent tradition by failing to make a mess of things. In fact, they prospered even more, with Fairbrother leading a middle-order charge to a total of 306 for 5, the largest ever conceded by the West Indies in any one-day international. Even the chairman of selectors, who's felt like wringing necks in the past, was moved to massage egos. The response initially was typically Caribbean. 307 to win? No problem. But inevitably it was, particularly when Peter Martin on his debut claimed 3 prized wickets in his first 3 overs, including Brian Lara. That should have been it as a contest, but the furious hitting of Junior Murray propelled the West Indies much closer to their target than they had any right to expect, and English nerves were still fraying when his hapless run-out eventually handed them a victory by 25 runs.
And that's the day in sport. Now here's Alison with the weather.
Thanks, Rob. And today's cold conditions were the result of a moderating cold southwesterly airstream, while showers were reported in western, central and southern highland areas. Temperatures were up to 7 degrees below average. The state's top of 13 degrees was shared by Wynyard, Burnie and Devonport. At 6 o'clock, the barometric pressure was 1,015 and rising. Some big rainfalls overnight, 37 millimetres at Rosebery and 29 at Lake St Clair. To the satellite photo, which shows a frontal cloud band south of Western Australia and a low pressure system in the Tasman Sea. Today's chart shows that low and a cold front in the Tasman Sea, with a high extending a ridge down to the west of Tasmania. Tomorrow's chart has a high centred near Adelaide, directing a westerly airstream over Tasmania. To the interstate forecasts, and becoming fine in Adelaide and Melbourne, and mainly fine and dry elsewhere. Locally, drizzle in western districts, otherwise fine. There's a road weather alert for elevated roads in western, central and southern Tasmania, which may be affected by snow or ice overnight and tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, the Cradle Mountain Road remains closed, while Mount Wellington Road is closed at the Springs. The major centres tomorrow, Burnie and Devonport, a top of 14 degrees, Launceston 14 and Hobart, a top of 13 degrees. Now a quick recap of tonight's main stories. The UN facing an awful choice in Bosnia tonight, whether to call off the NATO bombing raids, virtually abandoning civilians to the Serb guns, or continue knowing that UN peacekeepers may be among the first to die. The federal government has signalled that Australia may make its spy agency open to wider public scrutiny, but no official comment on allegations that Australia was involved in a bugging operation against China. And the votes of 86,000 Tasmanians are being counted tonight for 5 Legislative Council seats. And a reminder that for all the latest from the tally room, we'll have a special bulletin at 9:20 after the bill. Until then, good night.